what happened since December 21st,
Yeah.
the delay tactic, the violation of the Constitution by Granger and his cabal, and what has really brought us to this point now, where, as I like to say, that we are in uncharted waters as a country with regards to our Constitution. So welcome to the discussion this morning, Comrade Gail.
Thank you. And good morning to our viewers. It's a Sunday morning, and I know people are trying to have a break from all the stress of the week before and waiting for the week to come. But we are, as a country, in a constitutional wasteland. We are in a constitutional crisis, and it is very sad, and there's only one person who has brought this about. There's only one person responsible for this, and this is Mr. David Granger, who, at this point, is an unconstitutional president. He is heading an illegal government, and he is the one, after 9 months, has done nothing to name a date for elections. So that, as you said, we're in uncharted waters. I saw the Starbuck News call it a constitutional wasteland, and I think that's a very good description of the way where we are now. There is nothing to guide us on what, in the Constitution, what happens when a government changes into a dictatorship. You know, when it decides that to throw out constitutional rule, to throw out democracy. And one of the things we had warned, you know, Eddie, is that when any government overthrows a constitution, it is not just the issue of the no confidence motion in elections, but other democratic rights are then going to be at risk and vulnerable. And probably the first indication we've had of that is at the picketing, where people were exercising their right to protest, to show that their anger and frustration at a government that has violated the Constitution, that is now illegal. And we've seen the backlash from the government. We've seen the backlash from the government by the president saying that the intellectual authors of these protests must, he hopes that they can know how to stop it. Secondly, the intimidatory tactics, statements coming out from the PNC Congress, Congress Place, criticizing and attacking and making allegations about the picketers being hooligans. The president himself, Mr. Granger himself, calling this hooliganism. And then we see subsequently the statement coming out by the Guyana police force saying that, you know, they will have to take action on such issues as picketing and so forth. So that we have made it very clear that our right to protest, our right to vote, our right to work, all our fundamental rights are those that we as a people have a right to defend. And so these intimidatory tactics are totally unacceptable and an indication that this government is going to move more and more in the direction to erode human rights in our country, assembly, expression of our views, etc. And so I think that we're at a very critical junction. What is good is that we've seen the Bar Association come out, Chamber of Commerce, FITUG, MYO, CIOG, Dharmic Sabha, am I forgetting any?
The ABE.
And of course the international community, the United States, Britain, UK, and the European Union. And so this is just a quick summation of what we are in now in the last 4 days. And of course we've seen some of the reactions of what I call the apologists in the government making their statements, which we'll probably discuss as we go along.
Certainly. So the first issue we have to deal with, Comrade Gail, is the fact that Granger had been saying over and over, you know, they've been using all sorts of excuses, and the most recent excuse was, oh, we have to await Chica. Matter of fact, I think somebody quoted him, one of the newspapers quoted him saying that he was uncomfortable, this is before the 18th, to be a caretaker president, running a caretaker government. And
but he was uncomfortable because, Eddie, of travel. He wasn't uncomfortable because he was violating the Constitution. He was uncomfortable because his ministers weren't able to travel as before, and they couldn't bring a budget. And I thought that was hilarious reading it. Here was his president uncomfortable with being a caretaker government and not recognizing that you're on the precipice of violating the Constitution and you're worried about traveling.
But and that's the point. That's the point, you know. So it's not really for Granger and the guys around him. It's not about he's uncomfortable because he cannot move the country forward for any reason. They haven't done anything in any case to move the country forward. But the fact that he said he was uncomfortable and all of these things, and he was eagerly awaiting GCOM to give him a timeline. Yeah. So guess what? 4 days after GCOM would have given him a timeline, he hasn't said anything. Matter of fact, this guy that does nothing, Ramjatan, is giving timeline.
Yeah, of course. Apparently last night, Mr. Ramjatan announced that the elections would be in the first week of March. I don't know if he's assumed the role of the president or Mr. Granger, but the point is that he went on to say, however, that the PPP, they would force the PPP to come to the National Assembly to give them the 2/3 majority, having attacked in his press, in his interview, all sorts of allegations about the PPP, so that WPA and AFC, because WPA is taking a similar line, that both of these are part of the APNU, and basically they're just the handmaidens of the PNC. That's all they've become. They went in as political parties that were going to be able to bring change and to be able to modify and manage the PNC and get rid of the PNC's bad history and all this nonsense they told the Guyanese people. The point is they've become the handmaidens. They are the ones out there speaking for the PNC and carrying this line. One that, and oh, by the way, Mr. Ramjatan said in Burpees that they can win convincingly when elections are called. And of course, everyone is saying, well, if that is so, why haven't you called elections?
Exactly the point.
If you can win convincingly, what's stopping you? What has stopped you for 9 months? What has stopped you for 9 months? And therefore, we know that the government has, over the last, I just want to retract one thing, and that is that when we look at Mr. Granger today, and the fact that 4 days, as you said, have gone by, and that he has not named a date, he has not even recognized the fact that he has overthrown the Constitution. He keeps saying to the people, but I abide by the Constitution. This is the behavior of a person who is delusional and or is such a narcissist that they cannot comprehend that they have violated the basic doctrine of our nation and the supreme law of our nation, the Constitution. And so him saying now that GCOM has given him the date, end of February 2019. This is in line with what Mr. Corbyn and Mr. Alexander and Mr. Trotman and GCOM, this was their timeline. This was the framework of February 2019, prior to March 21st, 2019. This is where they were going. This is the line they carried throughout. And so, end of February. Now he's saying, but I need a date from GCOM. But is this another way of excusing and giving him more time again? These are issues that are very worrying. I mean, as a party, we have been extraordinarily patient. We have been highly responsible. We have for 9 months watched and participated in all the processes, all the options available to explore the issue of the no confidence motion and the issue of elections being held within 3 months. We have been very, very patient and responsible. On September 18th, the red line was crossed.
Yes.
The red line was crossed, and they know it. These are persons that can read English. They can read basic English. The CCJ made it very clear. Up until then, the issue was paused. However, they went on to say the pause has been lifted is as of June 18th. Therefore, 3 months hence. And September the 18th, Mr. Granger crossed the red line. And therefore, we shall be protesting. We shall exercise our right to peacefully protest and show our abhorrence to the constitutional rule being violated, the democratic rights being undermined in this country, until we have a date for elections so that we can go to the polls.
And you know, the funny thing is that I think the Guyanese people are recognizing how naked the excuses are that are coming from Mr. Granger, every time he's shifting the goalposts, he's finding some new excuse. And when we listen to what Ramjatan would have said about forcing the PPP to go back to Parliament and all sorts of things, and like you rightly said, that is how delusional they are. Yeah. Somehow, Ramjatan and the others think that they own this country and they own the people of this country. So whenever they decide to call the elections, the fact of the matter is, while the PPP has been quite patient, Comrade Gail, I think the Guyanese people are running out of patience because they're seeing the impact, not only after the 21st of December, but also the impact since the coalition went into power on their daily lives, on their economic survival. So the people are, and I think people are starting to unite, to come together, to say that it is time we have the elections. But you mentioned the issue of statements coming out from various parties. We're going to examine the police statement. I think it is necessary we examine that separately. But I don't know why Mr. Granger and the PNC, because all I'm seeing in the people that call themselves a government is really the PNC, like you rightly said. The AFC and so on are just doing the bidding for the PNC.
Well, any party that gets beaten by 113,000 votes in 2018 November, what kind of party is that? It has no respectability left. It's naked, as you said. It's not a party of any respectable presence in our country, and the WPA hasn't even bothered to test itself for the last 15 years. So, I mean, this is all a sham. But they need these two parties as the apologists out there and the defenders.
And for window dressing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
As a coalition. But the point I wanted to make, Comrade Gail, is the fact that you had the Bar Association, you had the international community, the ABE in particular. You had FITOG, you had all these other, what do you call it, civil society groups talking and issuing the call for there to be a date for elections.
Absolutely.
It seems only Mr. Granger thinks that Guyanese don't want the election. And like the leader of the opposition always put it, Mr. Granger seemed to be living in a bubble. And he has now pulled all the AFC and the others into that bubble with him, and totally oblivious of the reality on the ground.
Yeah, one of the things that, you know, in talking to people, some people who were supporters of APNU or sympathetic in that direction, seem to be surprised by Mr. Granger's behavior and the behavior of the government. However, if you start tracing from May 2015, we actually, when you look back and look at history, that period, it is the making of a dictator. There has been a making of a dictator. Mr. Granger has whittled away a number of the constitutional bodies. The Public Service Commission, the then chairman was told by the president, I don't want blood on my carpet. Changed the composition of the Public Service Commission so that he could appoint a whole set of his people and not. You have the Judicial Service Commission that has been defunct for the last 2 years. Since September 2017, the life of the Judicial Service ended. The Parliamentary Committee, headed by the APNU, has been very, let's say, delinquent in terms of rushing to put that into order. The Police Service Commission, having given instructions to withhold and suspend the promotion of police officers, brought in a commission inquiry headed by a person who then led to the change in the police force and the Police Service Commission that is to the creation of Mr. Granger. And so we've seen these things in Parliament. You've been there, Eddie, when the budgets come up for the constitutional bodies. They have cut the budgets of constitutional bodies when the Constitution very clearly says. And the amendment they brought in 2015, Mr. Greenwich's amendment, that they get their budget is given to them, basically.
Yes.
And so they've cut GCOM, they've cut the judicial, the Supreme Court, they've cut the DPP, they've cut the rights commissions, they have cut the GCOM, did I say that, in the Auditor General's office. These are constitutional bodies that every time they put up their budget, they've been reduced. This is form of whittling away the independence of constitutional bodies. So when you come to GCOM and the appointment of Patterson in 2017, which was, I think, all in preparation for 2020 election, you would have a gentleman there that will do as he's told, and 2020, this is where, with whatever mischief they had planned in 2018 and 2019 to prepare the ground for what would be rigged elections in 2020. The no confidence motion put a spoke in that plan. And so the response of the government is one to hold on to power for dear life, because once there are elections here that are free and fair, they're out. They're a one-term government, and that's it. They're over.
And I think that is one of the concerns for them, because clearly I think Mr. Granger and his cabal recognize that the gravy train will come to a stop once there is elections. And like you rightly said, I think the writing is on the wall if there's free and fair elections. But also what is important for us to recognize as a people is the fact that there seems to be no interest in having these elections.
No.
So Mr. Granger is going to find excuses after excuses to ensure that he holds on to power, whether it's a violation of the Constitution, whether it's trampling on the rights of people. And we've seen, like you rightly said, the statements coming out and the threat. It's a naked threat by Mr. Granger in Mabruma, in Region 1, Mabruma or Madia,
Yes.
where he said someone will be held accountable for
Kaituma.
for the protest. He said at the business luncheon where he was illegally performing the functions of president, that he hopes the intellectual authors of the protest know that there are consequences. So, and these are all indications of where we're heading, and that is into probably a full-blown dictatorship. And that is why Guyanese generally, and because this doesn't affect the supporters of PPP, it doesn't affect the supporters of any single political party, it affects Guyanese of all walks of life, where we need to come together to unite to ensure that we protect the democratic gains made since 1992.
I mean, the reaction of the government since the 18th has been one in which you very clearly see. You say we're going towards a dictatorship. My position, we are in a dictatorship. We're already in it. And the reason why I say that is that once you take the Constitution, overthrow it, violate it, it is a worthless piece of paper, then you are in a situation which whoever is holding the reins of government is illegally and unconstitutionally there. And that is the definition of a dictatorship, right? The way in which that they will operate is clearly showing now to use intimidation. Let's look at the police. The police, from all the footage I saw on the 18th, and there's evidence, so there's documentary evidence, which was actually, I think, live streamed overseas, etc., that this was a noisy but a peaceful picket. And having been around pickets for a long time in my younger days, we've been noisy, and it's not against the law to be noisy in a picket. When they talk about the minister and the overthrowing of the vehicle, all the footage shows that the people are far away from the car, several feet away from the car. These are manufactured, well, basically it's manufactured lies, but lie is a manufactured thing, but they have tried to create a situation to show that the minister's lives are threatened. Totally fallacious. Nobody's interested.
But there aren't ministers.
Well, that's the other thing, but we're not interested in that. We believe the person who is responsible and who is accountable to all Guyanese is David Granger. The rest are illegal, and basically in the last 4 years they've been quite incompetent, inept, and it's only because of no confidence motion some of them are running into communities and meeting people and handing out goodies and spending over $1 billion in outreaches. Otherwise, they'd be very comfortably in their SUVs and in their fancy mansions, enjoying life.
I think somehow, Comrade Gail, when one looks at the police statement that came out subsequently, I know you will address it, we have to look at two things. One, let us look what happened on the day of the protest.
Right.
Not a single policeman had the cause to cost any of the protesters.
No.
because they were standing there and the guys seemed very relaxed and comfortable with the fact that we don't have to do anything here. They were uncomfortable. The riot police especially, I think, seemed uncomfortable that they had to come out there with the riot gear, knowing that the protest wasn't violent. There was no escalation of anything, like you rightly said, just some noise. With regards to the vehicle, the state vehicle that was carrying the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, no one touched the vehicle.
No.
Because I was there, and I can say, and I can say this openly, I personally walked around the vehicle and said to the comrades there, please do not touch the vehicle. We don't want anybody to accuse us of damaging vehicle and all sorts of things.
Right.
So that's a lie.
Yeah.
That people were wanted to overturn vehicle and all sorts of things. But I'm saying that you look at the way the police operated that day as against the statement that came out. If there was some sort of violence or something to show there was a threat, the police would not have been standing there relaxed doing absolutely nothing. So where did the statement came from?
Well, what very clearly we've seen is the interference in the police force, the army, the prison, and the fire, the discipline services. Whilst the commander-in-chief has a certain role to play, there is no commander-in-chief basically now because the president, Mr. Granger, is unconstitutional. What you fall back on is what the discipline services of our nation are expected to be, and that is to abide by the Constitution. The Constitution gives them certain powers and protects them from being given unlawful instructions. That is, the public servants as well. And you have a situation where they're operating within a government that is no longer legal, a president that is unconstitutional and illegal. So what instructions given to them are legal? The fact that that statement came out afterwards, our view is that the police behaved in a professional manner on September the 18th. And that's all one asks the police force of this country to be. That is professional. We're not asking them to be pro-PPP, and we will certainly not agree to them being pro any other political party, but that they acted professionally. When the police came out with that statement, it's very clear that it was orchestrated from outside of the police force to make the police force look as if, you know, they're threatening the PPP picketers and the PPP and stuff like that. We have been around a long time, and I understand, Mr. Rohi, on a program you had last night, documented all the hooliganism and terrorism we have been subjected to as a country and as People's Progressive Party supporters, friends, and members over decades. And so we have to recall a recent one of 2014, Agricola, the blocking of the road. Who was behind that? We know who was behind that. We know who was behind all that. That women had their clothes ripped, that cars were burnt, that tires were burnt, that people were stuck on that road at night and children on that road for hours and hours and hours. Isn't that hooliganism? And so we could go one after other and distract this program from listing the hooliganism. Mr. Granger seems to be very thin-skinned, but I believe that may not be any longer a correct description of him. I believe that he really is behaving like a dictator, like an emperor, that cannot comprehend how the minions at the bottom could dare protest against his authority, his being. And so the police have to be, we're saying to the police, look, all we're asking of you is to be professional. That do your job in a professional manner. Do not, if you have instructions of ministers saying to arrest this person, arrest that person. That is beyond the scope of the minister. I was there. I was a Minister of Home Affairs. I was a Minister of Home Affairs, and I know that you cannot call the police and say, arrest Eddie. I cannot do that. The police have to do their work, and they have to investigate, and if there's evidence, then they play the role. The evidence of September 18th, documented and gone abroad, as they say, shows no hooliganism. It shows a loud and very active protest. You know, I was watching last night some of the footage on the climate protests, the climate change protests in different parts of the world. In Paris, where it was violent and led to the police bringing out water cannons and so on, but also looking at it in New York and Washington. People said things, they chanted things, they moved. They didn't have to get police permission. They did that in all parts of the world. All parts of the world. And here we have Guyanese in front of the Pegasus Hotel, surrounded by barricades, and peacefully saying, we want elections now. Number one. Two, this is an illegal president, unconstitutional president. It's time for you to go. There's nothing illegal about that. And so we call on the police and the public service to recognize that you're guided by the Constitution and that you can be given instructions that are lawful but not unlawful. And that we hope that our police force, we've noticed this morning, I think there's some promotions in the police force. I don't know, one of them was there for corruption and has been, found to be not corrupt, although many policemen gave evidence to the fact. So is that a reward? Is this the other ways the government is trying to buy off, intimidate and buy off people? When we look at the AFC's position as of calling in their statement for the PPP to go back to Parliament, and Ramjatan's worst statement last night, we will be forced, they will force the PPP to go back to Parliament. I'm not quite sure if Mr. Ramjatan was clear in his head. Maybe, it's Saturday afternoon, maybe he had a few. But the issue is that you can't force the PPP because we're not going back. We have said it. We have said it from March 21st. We are not going back to Parliament. We made it clear. We said very clearly, we went to the President with an offer in March. And I keep repeating this as a mantra because there's some people saying, well, we've got to get these two parties together. How do you get the two parties together when the PPP as a parliamentary opposition wrote Mr. Granger, he was then a caretaker president, although he refused to accept it, that one, we would give our 2/3 in Parliament for elections on or before April 30th, when the life of the list would expire. We put conditionalities, that is, no new contracts, no procurement, no bilateral, no further sale of our resources, our natural resources, etc., and that this should be, this was one of the conditions. Mr. Granger ignored it completely. He did not even have the decency, who is a man who is always concerned about etiquette and decency, that he didn't have the decency to write a letter saying, I acknowledge your letter, and this is not possible. We don't agree. But so we offered, before the March 21st, an option for this government to use it. They have sat all these months doing nothing. And now, after they've crossed the red line, here is the government, through its mouthpiece, AFC and WPA, saying that PPP has to come to Parliament to extend the life of Parliament. And we're not going to do it. We've made it very clear we're not going to do it. We're not going to legitimize a government that has been illegal for months and months and months.
Well, and that's the thing. I think maybe apart from the few that Ramjatan had, I think that is their thinking, that they're going to come up with another excuse why Granger cannot name a date for the elections and somehow try to think that they can force the PPP back to Parliament. And you made the point that the PPP will not return. But I want to return to, because I think Mr. Granger is being hypocritical in his hooliganism statement. And it is something that we need to clarify. I think we've established, and we didn't need to establish that the protest, while it was animated, the people were loud, that it was peaceful. Because no one was injured, no one was arrested for injuring anybody or damaging property or anything of that sort. But Mr. Granger seemed to be suffering from selective amnesia. I think somehow he forgot the 1992 when the PPP won the elections. Somehow he forgot the more fire, slow fire in 1997 and all that happened then. Buildings were burned, people were robbed, women were raped, people were killed. It was the PNC protesting, not the PPP.
Yeah.
Somehow he forgot what happened in Sophia in the 2015 elections, where the property
Exactly.
of people were destroyed by the PNC.
Not only that, there were guns and there were a lot of people were being shot.
Mr. Granger seemed to forgot that the PNC Congress, when he was elected, that one of the men there was pictured with a gun in his hand, and I think he was behind Mr. Granger.
Yeah, and he was
so
quite-
you need want to talk about hooliganism and thuggery and all these things. He need to look in the mirror and look at home, as in the PNC.
But remember the 2015, as recent as the 2015 elections, the number of mobs that were surrounding polling stations, not only in Georgetown, some parts of the East Coast, where a number of vehicles were burnt, where the polling agents for our party could not come out of the building after the count. This was 2, 3 in the morning. We have the St. Sidwell incident where Kwame McCoy had jaws broken in several places by the mob there. The police were unable or willing, who knows, to handle the mob. The Sophia incident you talk about that went on from 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, until next morning. You know, those people had to be rescued. Mr. Granger and Mr. Trotman went to the crowd that were armed in front of the place in Sophia and told them, okay, calm down, calm down. When they left, that's when the shooting and the burning started. I don't know if that was a signal or people decided they don't obey their leader. But this is a point that we can talk about hooliganism all we want, and the history is there. But we're seeing in the last few days a government that it appears to have been displeased with the police. The police, from the way, the tone of their statement was that they wanted the police to lock up people and everything else, and the police behaved professionally. They were upset with the Manufacturers Association. It is Mr. Granger, I understand, who invited himself in a way. He's the one, although he was invited, he set the date, September the 20th. Did he really believe that September the 18th would pass and nothing would happen, that people would just sit there and say, okay, great leader, we accept what you have to say? So he was upset with the manufacturers for the protest. He made the manufacturers, clearly the manufacturers put out an apology, which I understand has caused some rift among the Manufacturing Association. He then has had PNC, Rickford Burke, Lincoln Lewis, David Hines, Ram Jatan, Basil Williams, and others, Moses Nagamucha, I mustn't forget him, although it's hard to remember him, that all attacking the US, UK, and European Union. And as you said, they have short memories, or it is just that they're just intellectually dishonest, and they really don't care. It is all about hanging on to power. Because in the 2014, the prorogation, we can go back to footage and show Mr. Granger and Mr. Greenwich and Mr. Trotman and Mr. Hughes and all these people talking about the government had prorogued Parliament, it shouldn't have done that, we have to have elections, and calling on the same US, British, Canadian, European to stop aid coming into Guyana. And in fact, they did. Millions and millions of US dollars and euros that were in the pipeline for Guyana as a result of those protests, as a result of the work that these parties did at the international level, that we were denied millions and millions of US dollars for development in Guyana as a result of the prorogation. And the prorogation was a constitutional act provided for in the Constitution. When Mr. Granger now decides that he has to get a date from GCOM, he already has a date, the end of February, that, yes, as you said earlier, that he's probably trying to move the goalpost, as always. The same statement where he said he was uncomfortable, he also went on to talk about that he needed a certificate of readiness. So this is a new, conditionality criteria.
Yeah.
And so he said that, first of all, they had to be assured that GCOM had staff and resources, that there were printed ballot papers. So how do you printed ballot papers when you don't have a date, you haven't had a claims objection, you haven't had a nomination date where the political parties give their candidates' names so that the ballot papers could be printed? This is absurd. This is the most bizarre statement I've heard. But the point he goes on to say, which I find is instructive, he says, after this, having been assured that this is happening, I shall consider. He doesn't say I shall name a date. I shall consider naming a date. And we in the PPP want to make it very clear that we want elections at the very end of February or within the first day or two of March. We're not sliding along. So Mr. Ramji can say the first week of March and all of that kind of stuff. But he's not Granger, and many times he's spoken and Granger's counteracted him. So I take nothing that Ramjadan says worth much. But the issue is that we want elections, but Mr. Granger, using the same constitution that he has rejected and thrown out, the same constitution gives him the power at any time, to name a date for election. So we're in the situation now where he can name a date. He can name a date. He never had to wait for GCOM in the first place. We all know that. But at this point, he can name a date. And the GCOM, despite the fact that we're dissatisfied, disappointed with February 2020, which falls directly into line with what the deadline and the time frame that the PNC and government appointed commissioners were saying in the GCOM, that the point is that we are saying to him, as the US, the UK, and the European Union, and other civil society bodies like the Bar, name a date immediately. All he has to do have done on September the 18th night or September 9th, he says, here's the date. But now he seems reluctant to. Can you imagine you put your country into a constitutional crisis, you've thrown out the Constitution, and you're saying that you're waiting for your cabinet, which is illegal, to discuss the issue of elections. A cabinet, again, is being kept at its standard date, Tuesday. So there's no hurry by this gentleman who is running this country unconstitutionally to move in this direction. He can name a date, and then so we all know, okay, we named a date. We have a date that we're working towards. He doesn't have to wait until February to do that. He can do that now.
But if a date is named now, Comrade Gail, it's almost 5 months for GCOM to prepare. And like you rightly said, the only way you can have printed ballot papers and a whole host of other things is for Mr. Granger to name a date. Yeah. So that GCOM can start the preparations. I'm disappointed that GCOM didn't start preparations from so long ago, but we all know the history of what happens here and so forth. But I think we're almost out of time, and what I want to say, if the operator can indicate to us how much time we have remaining before so that we can continue or try to wrap things. We have like 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
The point is, and I made the point earlier, Comrade Gail, is the fact that what is happening in our country, the crisis that we are in, is not something that is going to only affect supporters of one political party.
Absolutely.
It's going to affect every single Guyanese, and we need to understand, and we need to read, comprehend, interpret the ABE statement and the impact it will have on Guyana economically, because they mention the impact it will have on social services, on the economy, on development. And development in a country, social services and the economy, they don't select you based on your political allegiance. They affect every single Guyanese. So it is a time now where Guyanese, regardless of your political affiliation, you have to ensure that you demand respect for the Constitution. You demand that we preserve our democracy. We cannot allow it to slip back 20 or 30 years and to go back into a full-blown dictatorship. I know you keep maintaining that we are already in a dictatorship. But it's time for Guyanese to unite, to demand that Granger names a date and that we get on with the elections as soon as possible.
I think that all Guyanese, regardless of who we vote for, regardless of where we live, what gender, what preferences, what religion, what class, we are all now faced with a choice. Are we in favor of constitutional rule and democracy? or are we in favor of a dictatorship? That's all the choice we have. This is not a choice about PPP, PNC. This is not the choice. The choice is now, do we want to live in a constitutionally ruled nation with democratic principles, values, and rights? Or do we want to continue blindly to stay under a dictatorship and let them do what they will with us as a people? This is why it's a simple choice. And I believe that the majority of Guyanese want to live in a nation that's democratic, where they have their rights. They know that they're treated equally with other people, that they have a right to exercise their right to vote and show their power to put in government who they want. That is a choice we face now. When the date of elections is named, that is when the political parties will go out and campaign and win over. But in the last 5 years, we have watched a nation that had reached a certain level of progress, reverse. And that's why I said the making of the dictatorship didn't start on September 18, did not start on March 21st, did not start on December 21st. It started slowly and whittling away certain basic principles. And they also did that to the people with the economy, taxation, increasing cost of living, selling our natural resources for next to nothing. And so we have reached a point where what we are in now, the situation is going to get worse. The economy will suffer more, particularly when the international community says we will be unable, this will hinder, this decision to not hold elections and name a date will now hinder their ability to support Guyana's developmental needs. What it means in coded language is there are going to be consequences. And where the consequences, mostly with funding and what you call grant money and stuff like that. So we have a situation where all Guyanese, we can be united on one thing. When we come to elections, we'll vote. We'll champion our cause. At this point, as we protest, as we show our abhorrence to the fact that Mr. Granger has thrown out the Constitution, has for 9 months held us back as a people from exercising our sovereignty, of exercising our right to vote. So he's not doing what Burnham did, which was rigged elections. He isn't even coming to that point yet. He is refusing, denying the Guyanese people the right to vote over 9 months. And so when we got in protest and we said we will do that, we call on all Guyanese, regardless of your political affiliation, regardless of religion and class and everything else, to come out and stand up for democracy, for constitutional rule. And we must show that in every part of the country, in all 10 regions. And wherever this unconstitutional president goes, and his cabinet, his cabal, we must show them that as a people, it doesn't matter where they go, that we will not accept them doing what they've done to our Constitution, rejecting our Constitution, violating our Constitution, remaining in power without the mandate of the people of this country. They're naked as they're born. They're naked as they're born. The Constitution gives them no cover anymore, and therefore we must say to them, give us a date. This is not the perfect situation we would have liked. We would have liked elections before March 21st. The country would have been way ahead, but we are now where we are. We are accepting that GCOM said the end of February, and therefore we're saying the date must come immediately after that, not 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months. We must have a date, February 28th, March the 1st.
Thank you very much, Comrade Gail, for joining me today, and of course, all of you who would have joined us at home this Sunday morning to discuss what is happening in our country and the need for us to unite and to peacefully, and I must emphasize, to peacefully send that message to David Granger and his cabal that we want respect for our Constitution, we want to preserve our democracy, and most of all, the people of this country want to elect or to choose a government
Yeah.
of their choice. And Mr. Granger, regardless of what he thinks, his only option that is available is to go to the polls, is to call the elections. So all of us must unite and to ensure that we send that message to Mr. Granger and his cabal that we are not prepared to allow a dictatorship. So thank you very much for joining us. Comrade Gail, thanks for being here this
Thank you very
morning.
much for having me. Thank you, Ed.
Bye for now.